Dr. Cameron Ward pressed his palm against the cool metal of the observation deck's viewport and wondered if alien civilizations had invented antacids. His stomach churned with the kind of nervous energy that usually preceded either breakthrough discoveries or career-ending disasters, and given humanity's track record with first impressions, he wasn't placing bets on the former. "Stop fidgeting with the quantum translator, Dr." Elizabeth Thorne muttered from beside him, her eyes fixed on the star field beyond. "You've calibrated it 17 times in the past hour." 18, actually, Cameron corrected, earning him a withering look that could have powered the ship's fusion cores. "But who's counting?" The Meridian's edge hummed with an unusual tension that seemed to permeate even the recycled air. 347 souls aboard this floating testament to human ambition, and every one of them knew that today would either mark the beginning of a new era for their species or become a cautionary tale about the dangers of reaching too far into the cosmos. Cameron's specialty in xenolinguistics had made him indispensable to this mission, though he suspected his inclusion had more to do with his ability to remain calm under pressure than his academic credentials. A trait that was being thoroughly tested as he watched the digital countdown on his wrist display tick toward 0. "Incoming quantum signature detected," announced Lieutenant Rodriguez from the main console, her voice carrying that particular brand of controlled panic that military personnel perfected. "Translation matrices are online and synchronized." The air in the center of the observatory deck began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, except these waves moved with purpose and mathematical precision. Cameron felt his breath catch as reality seemed to fold in on itself, creating a pocket of space that belonged to neither here nor there. "I still can't believe they call it quantum translocation," whispered Dr. Patel, the mission's theoretical physicist. "It's basically cosmic teleportation, but somehow translocation sounds more professional in the reports." Cameron bit back a nervous laugh. Trust human bureaucracy to make even miracle technology sound like a dental procedure. The shimmer intensified, and suddenly the deck was no longer empty. 5 figures materialized with the same casual ease that Cameron associated with stepping off an elevator, though he doubted elevator travel had ever involved temporarily ceasing to exist in any meaningful sense of the word. The ethereal delegation stood with a poise that made every human on deck suddenly conscious of their own awkward limbs and tendency to shift their weight from foot to foot. They were unmistakably humanoid, a cosmic coincidence that had sparked 3 months of heated debate among the xenobiology team about convergent evolution versus directed panspermia. "Well," Cameron murmured to himself, "at least we won't need to figure out how many hands to shake." Their leader stepped forward, and Cameron felt his carefully maintained professional composure take a significant hit. She moved with a fluid grace that suggested either superior bone structure or really excellent physical therapy. Her features were delicately angular in a way that reminded him of classical sculptures, if classical sculptors had possessed an intuitive understanding of advanced geometric principles. And then there were her ears. They swept upward and back from her head in elegant points that caught the observatory's ambient lighting and seemed to redirect it in subtle, almost musical patterns. Cameron found himself wondering if they served some function beyond the purely aesthetic, though he had to admit the aesthetic function alone was working remarkably well. "Greetings," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that the translator rendered into English with only minor digital static. "I am Sylvain of the Ethereal Collective. We come seeking understanding between our peoples." Dr. Thorne stepped forward with the kind of careful diplomacy that came from years of navigating academic committee meetings. "Welcome aboard the Meridian's Edge. I am Dr. Elizabeth Thorne, and on behalf of humanity, we extend our gratitude for this opportunity." Cameron watched the formal exchange with the fascination of a linguist and the anxiety of someone who knew that every word was being recorded for historical analysis. The translation matrices were performing admirably, though he noticed subtle delays that suggested the ethereal language operated on principles his team hadn't fully grasped. "Your vessel is impressive," Sylvain continued, her gaze sweeping across the observation deck. "The quantum resonance patterns suggest a sophisticated understanding of subspace mechanics." "Thank you," Dr. Thorne replied. Though I suspect our technology appears quite primitive compared to your translocation systems. A sound emerged from Sylvain that the translator tagged as amusement, though Cameron wasn't entirely convinced it had captured the full meaning. All species begin somewhere. Your willingness to reach across the void speaks well of your potential. Cameron found himself studying the way her ears shifted slightly when she spoke, a subtle movement that seemed synchronized with the tonal qualities of her voice. He wondered if it was conscious or involuntary, like the way humans gestured with their hands when excited. Dr. Ward, Dr. Thorne's voice cut through his observations, would you care to present our linguistic analysis of the preliminary transmissions? Cameron felt every eye in the room turn toward him, including a pair that reflected the starlight with an intensity that made his prepared remarks temporarily vanish from his memory. He cleared his throat and hoped his voice wouldn't crack like a teenager's. Right, yes, the linguistic patterns. He activated his tablet, grateful to have something to focus on besides Sylvain's unwavering attention. We've identified 17 distinct phonemic structures in your transmissions, though we suspect we're missing several tonal variations that exist outside human hearing range. 19 structures, Sylvain corrected gently. Though your analysis is remarkably accurate given the limitations of your sensory apparatus. Of course it is, Cameron muttered under his breath, then louder, we'd be honored to learn more about the variations we've missed. Perhaps, she said, and Cameron could have sworn her ears tilted forward slightly, you could demonstrate your understanding of what you have identified. Language is best shared through practice, not theory. Dar. Thorne shot Cameron a look that clearly said, don't embarrass our entire species, but Sylvain's suggestion felt like an invitation rather than a test. Cameron activated his quantum translator's learning mode and attempted a simple greeting in what he hoped was recognizable ethereal. The sounds that emerged from his throat felt foreign and musical, like trying to sing in a key that existed between the notes he knew. Sylvain's expression shifted to something the translator helpfully labeled as pleased surprise, though Cameron suspected that was a considerable simplification. Your pronunciation is quite good, she said. Though you appear to have just announced that you are a small, furry creature that enjoys consuming stellar radiation. The laughter that bubbled up from Cameron was entirely involuntary and thoroughly unprofessional. Well, I mean, who doesn't enjoy a good stellar radiation snack now and then? This time, Sylvain's amusement was unmistakable, even without the translator's assistance. The sound was like wind chimes made of crystal, if wind chimes could convey warmth and genuine delight. I believe, she said, that this conversation will be far more interesting than our diplomatic protocols anticipated. The formal reception had all the natural flow of a diplomatic ballet performed by people who had learned the steps from instruction manuals written in 3 different languages. Cameron stood near the refreshment station, watching Dr. Thorne navigate a conversation about interstellar trade agreements with the patience of someone defusing a particularly complex bomb. The synthetic protein dispensers are apparently malfunctioning again, Lieutenant Rodriguez announced quietly, appearing at Cameron's elbow with the stealth that military personnel seem to develop through pure necessity. They keep producing what the computer insists is chicken teriyaki but smells suspiciously like industrial lubricant. Wonderful, Cameron replied, eyeing the small crowd of ethereal delegates who were politely examining the offered refreshments with expressions that suggested they were conducting scientific analysis rather than considering lunch. Nothing says, welcome to human civilization, quite like potentially toxic food substitutes. Across the deck, Sylvain moved through the gathering with the effortless grace of someone accustomed to formal events, though Cameron noticed she had a tendency to pause whenever someone spoke directly to her, as if weighing each word for meanings beyond the surface translation. Her ears, he observed, seemed to shift position based on who was speaking, tilting forward when Dr. Patel explained the ship's fusion containment systems and rotating slightly backward when Captain Martinez discussed military protocols. Dr. Ward, came a voice behind him, and Cameron turned to find another member of the ethereal delegation approaching. This one introduced himself as Kalen, and his bearing suggested someone comfortable with academic discourse. Sylvain mentioned your facility with linguistic analysis. I am curious about your species' approach to conceptual translation. Conceptual translation. Cameron's academic instincts kicked in, pushing aside his social anxiety. You mean translating ideas rather than just words? Precisely. Your quantum translators excel at converting phonemic structures, but they struggle with context-dependent meanings. For instance, when you described yourself as a small, furry creature, the literal translation was accurate, but the humor was lost until Sylvain provided cultural context. Cameron felt heat rise in his cheeks. Right, that was. I'm still learning the intricacies of your language structure. Learning is admirable, Kalen said, and his ears tilted forward in what Cameron was beginning to recognize as a sign of interest. But I wonder if you understand why Sylvain found your mistake so amusing. Because calling myself a furry stellar radiation enthusiast is objectively ridiculous? Because in our culture, that particular phrase is something children say when they are being deliberately silly. You essentially introduced yourself with the linguistic equivalent of peekaboo. Cameron couldn't help but laugh. Great. Humanity's first impression involves me accidentally baby-talking to your diplomatic delegation. On the contrary, Kalen replied, it demonstrated your willingness to attempt communication despite the risk of embarrassment. This is considered a valuable trait among our people. The conversation was interrupted by a small commotion near the main viewport, where Dr. Patel was attempting to explain human stellar cartography methods to a group of increasingly bewildered-looking ethereals. Cameron could hear fragments of the discussion, which seemed to involve competing theories about dimensional mathematics and the relative merits of various faster-than-light travel approaches. Your Dr. Patel appears passionate about quantum mechanics, Kalen observed. Passionate is one word for it, Cameron replied. Last week she spent 4 hours explaining why our current FTL drives are elegant but mathematically offensive to anyone who would listen. As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Patel's voice rose above the general murmur of diplomatic chatter. But you see, the beauty of folded space transit is that it respects causality while completely ignoring the speed of light restrictions. It's like finding a loophole in the fundamental laws of physics. One of the ethereal delegates responded with something that the translator rendered as fascinating theoretical framework, though the tonal quality suggested polite bewilderment. She's going to explain her unified field theory next, Cameron muttered. Should I stage an intervention? Perhaps, Kalen suggested, you could redirect the conversation towards something less mathematically intensive. Cameron made his way across the deck, weaving between clusters of humans and ethereals who were discovering that first contact involved a surprising amount of small talk. He caught Sylvain's eye as he passed, and she offered what he interpreted as an encouraging smile, though he was becoming increasingly aware that his understanding of ethereal expressions might be limited. Dr. Patel, Cameron interrupted as gently as possible, perhaps our guests would be interested in the observation lounge. The stellar view from Deck 7 is supposed to be spectacular. Oh, excellent idea. Dr. Patel's enthusiasm immediately redirected itself toward a new target. The gravitational lensing effects around the binary star system create the most remarkable visual distortions. As the group began moving toward the lounge, Cameron found himself walking alongside Sylvain, who had somehow detached herself from her own conversation without any apparent rudeness. Your colleagues are quite energetic, she observed. That's a diplomatic way of saying Dr. Patel talks about physics the way some people discuss their favorite sports teams, Cameron replied. And you? What inspires such passion in your work? Cameron considered the question as they walked through the ship's corridors, past walls lined with digital displays showing everything from stellar navigation charts to what appeared to be someone's collection of Earth landscape photography. I suppose I'm fascinated by the idea that meaning can exist independent of the words we use to express it. That two completely different species can develop language in entirely different ways but still find common ground for understanding. A worthy fascination, Sylvain said, and Cameron noticed that her ears had rotated slightly forward. Though I wonder if you realize how rare it is for species to achieve meaningful communication during first contact. Most civilizations require years of careful cultural exchange before they move beyond basic information transfer. And yet here we are, having a conversation about the philosophy of language while walking through a starship, Cameron said. Either we're exceptionally lucky, or the universe has a sense of humor. Perhaps both, Sylvain replied, and there was something in her tone that suggested layers of meaning Cameron wasn't quite grasping. Your species seems remarkably adaptable. They entered the observation lounge to find Dr. Patel already pointing out various celestial phenomena to a group of ethereals who appeared genuinely interested in her explanations, though Cameron suspected they were being polite. The lounge itself was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling transparent aluminum windows that provided an unobstructed view of the surrounding star field. Now that's something you don't see every day, Cameron said, settling into a chair near the main viewing area. Through the window, a massive space station orbited a distant planet, its geometric structure seeming to defy both physics and aesthetic sensibility. That is a collective research facility, Sylvain explained, taking the seat beside him. We use it to study planetary formation patterns in this system. Research facility? Cameron studied the structure, which looked more like abstract art than functional architecture. It's beautiful. Like someone decided to build a mathematical equation. Mathematics and beauty are not mutually exclusive concepts in our culture, Sylvain said, and Cameron caught another one of those subtle tonal variations that the translator couldn't quite capture. We believe that truth and aesthetics are fundamentally connected. That's... Cameron paused, searching for the right words. That's actually a really beautiful way to think about the universe. Sylvain turned to look at him directly, and Cameron found himself momentarily lost in eyes that seemed to reflect starlight with unusual intensity. You think so? I do, he said, and realized he was speaking with a sincerity that surprised him. I mean, if you're going to explore the cosmos, might as well make it elegant, right? The conversation continued as the reception moved around them, other guests flowing in and out of the lounge as Dr. Patel provided what amounted to a guided tour of visible astronomical phenomena. Cameron found himself increasingly comfortable with Sylvain's presence, discovering that her sense of humor translated remarkably well across species barriers, even if her cultural references occasionally left him guessing. Your ship's artificial gravity is quite sophisticated, she mentioned during a brief lull in the conversation. Thanks, though I have to admit I don't really understand how it works, Cameron replied. Something about rotating magnetic fields and localized graviton manipulation. I just know that without it, formal receptions become much more complicated. Zero-gravity diplomacy does present unique challenges, Sylvain agreed. Though it can be entertaining to watch species attempt to maintain dignity while floating helplessly. Cameron laughed, imagining the current gathering taking place in microgravity. I think Dr. Thorne would have had a complete breakdown if she'd had to conduct negotiations while doing inadvertent somersaults. As the afternoon progressed, Cameron realized that first contact was turning out to be far more natural than anyone had anticipated. Perhaps, he thought, the universe really did have a sense of humor after all. The reception had evolved from stiff diplomatic formality into something resembling an actual social gathering, complete with the kind of relaxed conversation that Cameron had never expected to have with representatives of an alien civilization. Dr. Patel had finally exhausted her supply of astronomical enthusiasm and was now engaged in what appeared to be a friendly debate about faster-than-light communication theory with three ethereal scientists who seemed genuinely delighted by her unconventional approach to established physics. I'm beginning to think your Dr. Patel might revolutionize our understanding of quantum entanglement, Kalen mentioned as he joined Cameron near the refreshment station, which had thankfully been restocked with items that actually resembled food. Her proposal about using crystalline matrices to amplify subspace signals is either brilliant or completely insane. With Patel, those two categories tend to overlap significantly, Cameron replied, selecting what the dispenser optimistically labeled as Mediterranean fusion cuisine, though it looked suspiciously like recycled protein blocks with herbs. Last month she tried to prove her theory about parallel dimensional resonance by rewiring the ship's communication array. We lost contact with Earth for 6 hours. Did her theory prove correct? Actually, yes. That's the terrifying part. Across the lounge, Sylvain was engaged in conversation with Captain Martinez about human military protocols, though Cameron noticed she had a talent for steering discussions away from potentially sensitive topics and toward more philosophical questions about leadership and interspecies cooperation. Her ears, he had observed, provided a fascinating barometer of her interest level, rotating forward when someone said something that genuinely engaged her attention and settling back into a more neutral position during routine diplomatic exchanges. Your linguistic analysis has been remarkably insightful, another ethereal delegate approached, introducing herself as Nerith. We were particularly impressed by your identification of our tonal temporal language layers. Cameron felt a flush of professional pride. Thank you. Though I have to admit I'm still struggling with the context-dependent variations. Earlier I tried to ask about your homeworld's climate and apparently inquired about the emotional state of your planetary weather systems. An understandable confusion, Nerith replied with what the translator indicated was amusement. In our language, meteorological and psychological states share conceptual frameworks. Weather is considered a form of planetary consciousness. That's actually beautiful, Cameron said, genuinely fascinated. It implies a level of connection between environment and awareness that human languages don't really accommodate. Language shapes perception as much as perception shapes language, Nerith agreed. Your species' tendency to compartmentalize concepts into discrete categories is interesting from a linguistic evolution perspective. Their conversation was interrupted by a burst of laughter from Dr. Patel's group, where someone had apparently made a joke about theoretical mathematics that was funny enough to transcend species barriers. Cameron watched as even the usually reserved Captain Martinez cracked a smile at whatever had been said. It's remarkable how naturally this is going, Cameron observed. I expected first contact to be more formal. Formality has its place, Sylvain said, appearing beside them with the same quiet grace that seemed to characterize all her movements. But understanding requires a willingness to move beyond protocol. Spoken like someone who's done this before, Cameron replied. Not with humans, Sylvain said, and there was something in her tone that suggested layers of meaning. Your species is quite unique in its approach to contact situations. Unique how? Cameron found himself genuinely curious about the ethereal perspective on humanity's first impression. Most civilizations we encounter begin with extensive security protocols and cautious information exchange. Your delegation started with linguistic jokes and theoretical physics debates. Is that good or bad? It's refreshing, Sylvain replied, and Cameron could have sworn her ears tilted forward slightly. Most species require months of careful cultural preparation before they're comfortable with informal interaction. Cameron laughed. Well, humans have never been particularly good at following standard procedures. We tend to improvise and hope for the best. A strategy that appears to be working well, Nerith added. Your Dr. Patel has already proposed 3 collaborative research projects that our scientists find genuinely intriguing. And your Captain Martinez has demonstrated a remarkable understanding of the challenges facing spacefaring civilizations, Sylvain continued. Her insights about resource management and crew psychology suggest your species has given serious thought to long-term space exploration. Cameron felt a surge of pride for his colleagues and his species in general. We're good at adaptation. It's probably our most defining characteristic as a civilization. Among other things, Sylvain said, and Cameron caught something in her expression that the translator didn't quite capture. The afternoon continued with the kind of easy conversation that Cameron associated with academic conferences where the formal presentations had ended and the real intellectual exchange could begin. He found himself moving between different groups, sometimes translating cultural concepts, sometimes simply enjoying the novelty of discussing quantum mechanics with beings who had developed entirely different approaches to the same fundamental questions. Your translation matrices are quite sophisticated, Sylvain mentioned during a brief moment when they found themselves alone near the main viewport. Though I noticed they struggle with emotional subtext. Emotional subtext is challenging even for humans, Cameron replied. Half the time I'm not sure what other people really mean when they're talking to me. I find that difficult to believe, Sylvain said, and Cameron detected what might have been genuine surprise in her voice. Your sensitivity to linguistic nuance suggests someone quite attuned to communication subtleties. Professional hazard, Cameron explained. When you spend your career analyzing language patterns, you start noticing things other people miss. Though I'll admit, ethereal communication is teaching me how much I don't know. What have you noticed about our communication that puzzles you? Cameron considered the question carefully. There's a musical quality to your speech that seems to carry meaning independent of the actual words. And your ears. He gestured vaguely. They move in response to conversation in ways that suggest they're part of your expression system. Very observant, Sylvain said, and Cameron noticed her ears did indeed shift position, rotating forward in what he was learning to recognize as approval. Most species don't notice the auditory kinesthetic correlation in our communication. It's fascinating, Cameron said, warming to the topic. It suggests your language evolved to incorporate multiple sensory channels simultaneously. Do the ear movements have specific meanings, or are they more like unconscious emotional indicators? Both, Sylvain replied. Conscious positioning can convey specific information, but involuntary responses often communicate more than intended words. Cameron found himself studying her expression with professional curiosity and personal interest that was becoming increasingly difficult to separate. What are your ears telling me right now? That this conversation is more engaging than I anticipated, Sylvain said, and Cameron caught what sounded like humor in her voice. Good to know I'm not boring you with xenolinguistic theory, Cameron replied. On the contrary, your perspective is quite refreshing. Most linguists we encounter are primarily interested in cataloging communication structures. You seem more interested in understanding the consciousness behind the language. Language is just the surface layer, Cameron said, surprising himself with how easily the words came. The real communication happens in the spaces between words, in the things we don't say but somehow manage to convey anyway. Sylvain turned to face him fully, and Cameron found himself caught in her direct gaze. That's a remarkably sophisticated understanding of interspecies communication theory. Is it? Cameron felt heat rise in his cheeks. I mean, it just seems obvious that if two species can develop language at all, there must be some underlying commonality in how consciousness approaches the problem of sharing internal experience. Not obvious to everyone, Sylvain said softly, and Cameron realized they had somehow moved closer together during their conversation. The starlight streaming through the viewport seemed to illuminate her features in a way that made her appear almost luminous. You know, Cameron said, his professional composure beginning to slip as he found himself genuinely moved by both her intelligence and her unexpected warmth, I have to say. He paused, suddenly aware that whatever he was about to express had moved far beyond the bounds of diplomatic small talk or academic discussion. Sylvain waited, her attention focused on him with an intensity that made the rest of the reception fade into background noise. You're beautiful, Cameron said, the words emerging with a sincerity that surprised him. The effect was immediate and absolute. Every conversation in the observatory deck stopped mid-sentence, as if someone had activated a ship-wide silence protocol. Cameron felt the weight of dozens of eyes turning toward them, human and ethereal alike, and his stomach dropped as he realized he had just committed what was clearly a massive cultural error. The silence stretched across the vast space like a physical presence, and Cameron's mind raced through every xenolinguistic protocol he knew, searching desperately for some way to understand what he had done wrong. The silence that followed Cameron's words seemed to violate several laws of physics, creating a pocket of absolute quiet in a space that moments before had buzzed with the energy of successful diplomacy. Cameron stood frozen, acutely aware that every human and ethereal in the observatory was staring at him with expressions ranging from confusion to what appeared to be barely contained panic. Dr. Thorne's face had gone through several interesting color variations, settling on a shade that Cameron associated with impending diplomatic disasters. Captain Martinez looked like someone who was mentally calculating how quickly they could reach the escape pods, while Dr. Patel seemed genuinely fascinated by the sudden cessation of all conversation, as if she were witnessing an unexpected scientific phenomenon. "Well," Cameron said weakly, "this is awkward." Sylvain's expression was unreadable, her ears positioned in a way that Cameron had never observed before, tilted back and slightly upward in what could have been surprise, alarm or some complex emotional state that human psychology had never needed to catalogue. The other ethereal delegates exchanged glances filled with significance that Cameron lacked the cultural context to interpret. "Dr. Ward," Dr. Thorne's voice cut through the silence with the precision of someone performing emergency surgery on a diplomatic crisis. "Perhaps we should wait," Sylvain said, raising a hand in a gesture that somehow commanded attention from every person in the room. Her voice carried harmonics that the translator struggled to render, creating subtle delays that made each word seem carefully weighted. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Cameron repeated hopefully, grasping at any possibility that he hadn't just single-handedly derailed humanity's first contact with an alien civilization. "Dr. Ward," Sylvain continued, turning to address him directly, "in your language, what did you intend to convey with those words?" Cameron felt his mouth go dry. I meant that I find you aesthetically pleasing. Attractive." It was intended as a compliment, though I'm beginning to suspect that's not how it was received. Kalen stepped forward, his expression mixing what Cameron interpreted as amusement with something that might have been sympathy. "In our culture, to tell someone they are beautiful is not merely an observation about physical appearance." "Oh," Cameron said, his stomach sinking further. "What does it mean?" "It is a formal declaration of romantic intent," Sylvain explained, her voice gentle but precise. "Specifically, it announces one's desire to pursue a soul bond, which is our equivalent of what you might call eternal partnership. To say someone is beautiful is to declare that you wish to share consciousness with them across multiple lifetimes." The silence that followed this explanation was different from the first one, less shocked and more contemplative, as if everyone in the room was simultaneously processing the implications of cosmic-scale romantic miscommunication. "So," Cameron said slowly, "I accidentally proposed marriage. Eternal, interdimensional marriage." "More or less," Kalen confirmed, and Cameron was fairly certain he detected amusement in the ethereal's tone. "Right." Cameron rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache that probably warranted entry in some kind of xenological medical journal. "And I'm guessing this isn't something your people take lightly." "Soul bond declarations are considered among the most sacred expressions in our culture," another ethereal delegate explained. "They are typically preceded by extensive courtship rituals and careful consideration of psychological compatibility." Dr. Patel chose this moment to pipe up with characteristic scientific curiosity. "Fascinating. So you've essentially developed a linguistic structure where aesthetic appreciation is automatically conflated with romantic commitment. The evolutionary implications are remarkable." "Not now, Patel," Dr. Thorne muttered through gritted teeth. Cameron looked around the room, taking in the faces of his colleagues and the ethereal delegation, all of whom were watching this interspecies crisis unfold with varying degrees of fascination and horror. "So what happens now? Do I need to formally withdraw the declaration? Is there some kind of cosmic restraining order I should be aware of?" To his surprise, Sylvain laughed. The sound was musical and genuine, cutting through the tension like a tuning fork striking crystal. "Your sincerity is unexpected." "My sincerity?" "Among our people, false soul bond declarations are considered deeply offensive," she explained. "But your words, while culturally uninformed, carried emotional authenticity that our senses can detect. You spoke truth, even if you didn't understand the full implications of what you were saying." Cameron felt heat rise in his cheeks. "So I accidentally told the truth about finding you attractive while simultaneously proposing eternal spiritual marriage?" "Essentially, yes," Sylvain confirmed, and Cameron could swear her ears had shifted to what he was learning to recognize as a pleased position. "And this is not entirely unwelcome." Cameron ventured, hardly believing he was having this conversation in front of two diplomatic delegations and what felt like half the ship's crew. Your species' approach to emotional expression is remarkably direct, Sylvain said, and there was definitely warmth in her voice now. In our culture, soul bond courtship typically involves months of careful intellectual and spiritual evaluation. You bypass the entire process through sheer cultural ignorance. I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not, Cameron admitted. It's refreshing, Sylvain replied. Though perhaps we should discuss the practical implications of accidental soul bond proposals in a less public setting. Dar. Thorne stepped forward with the expression of someone regaining control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond normal diplomatic parameters. Perhaps we could arrange a more formal cultural exchange session to address these communication protocols. An excellent suggestion, Kalen agreed. Though I believe Dr. Ward has already provided us with valuable insights into human emotional directness. Cameron looked around the room again, noting that the expressions of panic had largely been replaced by curiosity and what might have been amusement. Even Captain Martinez seemed to have relaxed, though she still looked like someone mentally updating her reports with observations about the unexpected complexities of interspecies romance. I have to ask, Cameron said to Sylvain, what would have happened if someone from your culture had made the same declaration? Extensive psychological evaluation, family consultations, and approximately 6 months of compatibility testing, she replied promptly. And instead, you got an overenthusiastic xenolinguist with a talent for cultural misunderstandings. I did, Sylvain agreed, and Cameron caught something in her expression that made his pulse quicken. Though I'm beginning to think your approach might have certain advantages. Dr. Patel, who had been unusually quiet for several minutes, suddenly perked up. This is actually a perfect example of convergent emotional evolution. Despite completely different cultural frameworks, both species have developed linguistic mechanisms for expressing deep romantic attachment. Patel, Dr. Thorne warned. No, but think about it. The fact that Cameron's declaration resonated with authentic emotional content despite his complete ignorance of ethereal cultural context suggests that certain aspects of consciousness transcend species boundaries. She's not wrong, Kalen admitted. Your Dr. Ward's emotional directness bypassed our cultural protocols and accessed something more fundamental. Cameron found himself looking at Sylvain again, noting the way starlight caught the elegant curves of her ears and wondering if he was really having a conversation about interspecies romance or if the stress of first contact had finally caused his sanity to abandon ship entirely. So, he said carefully, where does this leave us? Do I need to undergo 6 months of compatibility testing, or have I already passed some kind of cosmic relationship exam? Perhaps, Sylvain said, moving closer to him with that fluid grace that had first caught his attention, we could find a middle ground between human directness and ethereal caution. I'd like that, Cameron replied, and realized he meant it with a sincerity that surprised him. Though I should probably learn more about your culture before I accidentally propose anything else. Learning is always admirable, Sylvain said, and Cameron noticed her ears had tilted forward in what he now recognized as genuine pleasure. Though I suspect your instincts for meaningful communication may be more reliable than you realize. As the reception gradually resumed around them, Cameron reflected on the strange turns his career had taken. He'd begun the day as a xenolinguist studying alien communication patterns and somehow ended up in what appeared to be the early stages of the universe's most complicated long-distance relationship. You know, he said to Sylvain as they watched Dr. Patel enthusiastically explaining her theories about emotional convergent evolution to anyone who would listen, I'm starting to think the universe really does have a sense of humor. Perhaps, Sylvain replied, it simply knows that the most important communications happen when we're brave enough to speak our truth, regardless of whether we fully understand the language we're using. Cameron smiled, feeling for the first time since arriving aboard the Meridian's Edge that first contact might just turn out better than anyone had dared to hope.